I'll go ahead and move to the agenda here right off the bat. We've got, a big agenda here. What I'll clarify is the plan will be to hopefully focus mostly on those bottom 4 bullets. You can see we have 9 different bullets, which is obviously too many different agenda items. I'll just say those top 5 I'll hopefully run through very quickly. All 5 of those on the top are all ones that you have heard from me before, most likely. We've covered them in the regional trainings. We've covered them in the webinar we did about a month ago. We covered them in the webinars we did in late February, early March. Those bottom 4 are where we're getting into some new material. That's what I'm hoping to spend most of the time on. But again, to stick with the review, my guess is most of you have seen this slide before. Scrolling up and down, not all of you are familiar names, but most of you are. So my bet is at least 90% of you have been to a webinar or an in-person presentation when you've seen this slide and heard me or others talk at length about the ABG Summary Report. But again, this is what the report we have in TE that summarizes all of those official ABG outcomes and all of those, short-term services. Here's another one that everybody's seen many times before. This one is looking at the 6 areas of AB 104 and listing which specific outcomes are included in each one of those 6 AB 104 categories. This one isn't quite as monotonous as those other 2 I showed you, but this one we introduced in the last webinar in April. But what this one is basically doing is showing the category with the ABG outcome title and comparing it to those WIOA federal-related titles we have in TE and on the TE answer sheets. That's been a definite area of confusion, so this kind of is a good quote-unquote translation sheet if you're having trouble reconciling what we talk about in ABG training versus some of those WIOA-centric terms we have in enterprise. This one's actually new. It looks really familiar, but it's not the same old, same old. This is basically using that same framework of the AB 104 outcomes and looking at it in terms of services. We have the 3 areas of services and some specific examples of the sort of services practically you might be offering and where it fits. That is it supportive, transition, or training services? But we certainly talked a lot about these different kinds of services as well. What I'll pause and I didn't explain is I'll just say if these are not run-of-the-mill things you've heard a bunch before, by all means stick some questions in chat. Don't feel shy about putting the brakes on me, but my feeling is that everything we've done from the start to now is all review. This is just showing how to enter the services. Some of you are using the answer sheet. If so, you mark it on update field 8. It's fine to be non-specific and just use that supportive training or transition category. If so, you have successfully entered what you're required to enter for ABG reporting. I dare say, though, most of you have decided you'd really rather prefer to be more specific. If so, then the update record probably won't be your best choice. If so, you want to go directly into TE. In TE, go to Record Students in Program Years, and you can see there's 3 separate sections on the screen. That is 1 section each for supportive, training, and transition. Okay, I've also looked at some of these outcomes that have been generating questions. Safe to say pretty much every regional training and every TE data webinar we've done to date, these particular outcomes pretty much inevitably generate at least a few questions somewhere along the way. The first FAQ item is, related to high school credits. This is one of the literacy gains outcomes. Again, to be clear, this is not being recorded by your marking specific credits or marking Carnegie units, as I've referred to it a lot because that's how the feds refer to this outcome. But again, you're using that self-reported level field. The way TE calculates it is it will note that you mark self-reported ASE low upon enrollment, and then sometime later on in the year you self-reported ASE high, what you're basically showing by marking it in this fashion is you're basically saying the student started the year, enrolled in high school diploma at the 9th or 10th grade level, and finished the year enrolled in high school diploma, enrolled at the 11th or 12th grade level. And again, you're just using the self-reported level field based on the number of credits the student has earned based on how your local district computes credits. So the oversimplified example is, we'll just say your district requires 180 credits to achieve the high school diploma. So if that's the number of credits that you're using, at your district, then 90 would be the cutoff point. You're basically saying the student started the year with less than 90 credits and finished the year with more than 90 credits. That is 9th or 10th grade level to start, 11th or 12th grade level to finish. Another one that has been a big question generator is, what the heck is the difference between workforce prep outcome and occupational skills gain? We've been saying these are not official answers, but occupational skills gain is a portion of a longer-term program, whereas workforce prep milestone suggests completion of a shorter-term program. I'm not quite sure which last statement you mean. You're going to need to be more specific, sorry. Anyway, occupational skills gain means you completed a portion of a longer-term program. So the example is, we're in a long-term welding program that goes for 5 semesters. So the example is the student finished the first semester, so now they're completing that written test or CASAS test or skills check or combination of all that basically is showing they've done everything to complete Module 1, and they're now qualified to enroll in Module 2. That's a good example of when a student gets an occupational skills gain. Workforce prep outcome, on the other hand, that's a shorter term program. So the example would be a 15-hour class on job search strategies, again, just 15 hours long, but we'll just say, yes, the student completes it, earns an informal certificate or whatever. That would suggest workforce prep milestone. Okay, credit from ABE to ASE. I'm still not sure what you're talking about, Lorraine. I haven't mentioned anything about that today. Okay, moving along, occupational outcomes, so kind of related to that occupational skills gain. Workforce prep milestone is kind of kicking it up a notch, you might say, is looking at those 2 outcomes that we're considering as literacy gains and comparing that against post-secondary, because in general, most of those outcomes in CTE are going to be in that quote-unquote post-secondary category. The issue is that post-secondary is what the feds would call performance indicator, whereas the occupational skills gain and workforce prep milestone are what the feds would call measurable skills gains. So again, by performance indicator, we mean final prize. That is, they got their occupational licensure, they entered college, they earned their high school diploma, got a job, whatever. That is a very tangible outcome. Again, all great outcomes, but just final prize outcomes that we can measure very easily by the fact that the student achieved something tangible. What we've been saying for a good year now is that those are great outcomes, but you relying on those exclusively maybe not so great, because we know we're leaving a lot of students out in the cold that way, where you're going to have students that we know are doing an outstanding job, but they just haven't been around long enough to get their occupational licensure or get their diploma or get the job or whatever. So we use measurable skills gains, pre-post testing, the obvious example, occupational skills gain and workforce prep milestone are that way as well. So again, it rises to the level of post-secondary here when you complete the longer-term program. So if it's just 15 hours, that's not post-secondary, that's just that workforce prep milestone. If you complete Module 1, but you still have 4 modules to go, that's not post-secondary either. That's occupational skills gain. But in that example where now the student has completed all 5 modules, they're now officially finished with your welding program, and they're earning that official licensure that certifies them to be a welder in the state of California. That's when it rises to the level of post-secondary. Okay, so all right, thank you, Bethany, for that. I guess you understood her question better than I did. Great. Okay, so moving along here to transition. This is the final one, but I'm just, honing in on ones that everybody repeatedly asks about. The final one is that transition outcome. So we've been using this visual where the blue, you're basically having students that start the year in one of those blue boxes and finish the year in one of those red boxes. The starting point to the left is students who are in ABE, ASE, or ESL in either K-12 adult ed or non-credit community college, and they basically move over to one of those red boxes on the right-hand side. That is, they move into CTE for either K-12 adult ed or community college, or at the bottom, they start at one of those points and finish in 4-credit community college. You can see those solid and dotted lines. If they progress in any one of those, from any one of those start points to any one of those end points, that's what we're calling the transition outcome. Again, one of them is a transition to CTE outcome. The other one is potentially transition for credit. So again, that kind of concludes all of the review related to outcomes. Again, I went really quick, but I just wanted to do a little table setting. So a little bit related to reports as well. This is the screenshot. I know most of you have seen this as well. This is just showing you where you go in TE to find all the ABG reports. Here's that ABG summary. Again, this is also review. We've got the left-hand side for literacy gains, middle section for other ABG outcomes, and right-hand section for short-term services. And again, we've been presenting this as high bar to the left, middle bar in the middle, and low bar to the right. That is, it requires very little to qualify for short-term services. It requires a bit more to qualify for outcomes. And then it requires the most in order to get in literacy gains for the pre-post gains. That section is basically, we're basically using the exact outcomes required by the federal NRS reports there. Okay, the part of our, updates here to the ABG summary. This slide is showing the updates we've made this year to the outcomes section. We've added columns C and F. Column C is just showing you how many have a pre-post gain. As an aside, when we dig into the meat here toward the end, there's an example that will hopefully illustrate how you might effectively use this column. But we've had the pre-post testing in the left-hand section. In the previous version, we showed you how many qualified. We showed you how many achieved pre-post learning gains. We added this column in the middle to just show you how many have a pre-post test pair. There's lots of ways in which that can benefit you for troubleshooting, for agency and regional evaluation, where when you see how many have a pre-post pair, that's a really, really useful way to be able to start troubleshooting how you might do better in this pre-post test section. In my opinion, knowing how many pre-post pairs you have is usually the first step you need to take in order to successfully troubleshoot this. More on that later, but we added this column. This is something we generally include in NRS tables. It's something we've included forever in our California payment points reports. So we added it here in the ABG summary as well. Then we added column F. That's the additional literacy gains. We just talked about a couple of those. Workforce prep milestone and occupational skills gain. Last year when we were talking literacy gains, we were primarily just talking about those gains your students are making through pre and post testing. Now this year, as you know, we've added several new outcomes. So now literacy gains means more than just pre and post testing. So for like occupational skills gain and workforce prep milestone, you don't really need pre and post testing for that, or at the bare minimum, you certainly don't need it for that any more than you need it for transition or employment or whatever. So we move those literacy gains outcomes to the middle section. That is, they do require 12 hours, they do require demographics, but they do not require anything related to pre and post testing. Moving along here, this is the big addition we made to column M for short-term services. Or on the right-hand side for short-term services, we basically broke it down so we have an aggregate number here. Column M is basically showing all the services, whereas those right four columns are specifying those specific categories of services. So number one, we've expanded it out with more information. Number two, in this example, this is basically going out of its way to show how the math does not add up in this section. That's been the part of this enhancement that's caused most of the confusion. So just to be clear, column M, you can see it's enrollees with any services received. It's written out in longhand like that on purpose to try to explain that column M is counting the number of students, not the number of services, whereas in those right four columns it's written differently. That is, it's specifying the number of services. So again, it's possible those right-hand four columns might equal column M, but if so, that just means you got lucky. Usually that math isn't going to add up because M is basically using a completely different approach than NOP and Q. Again, M is counting number of students. The right four columns is counting number of services. Okay, sorry, I'm not sure about the ACE. I think you can do the import-export. If you're talking about something more specific than that, that's probably a question for the third-party provider. But as far as I know, you can bring that in. I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess if you've got something more specific, you can ask it. The career services, the short answer to career services is not really. Originally, we weren't really going to include that. It was just going to be the three categories, but there is that extra bubble on the answer sheet. So quite frankly, the career services is really just if you can't beat them, join them. As originally, we really didn't have any interest in including career services, but because it was all there in that update field 8, obviously some people marked it by mistake. It isn't really that important which moniker we use. So last year when we did end of year, the command decision was, hey, what the heck, why not just include it? All it was just people marking the wrong bubble with information that was ridiculously unclear in the first place. Ridiculously unclear in the first place. So we just counted it. So we just added it to the report. So if you want to mark career services, that's great, but we really just have that one generic piece for career services. There's not really the details for that one like there is for those other three categories, but if you mark it on that form, it'll still get tabulated here if you're interested, whether it's a mistake or whether it's an on purpose. Does the gain to ASE high count as a payment point? If you mean that high school credits, yes, that is a payment point. If you mean transition to ASE, no, it's not. Okay, yeah, I think you can do the import-export. If that's all you mean, yes. If there's more to it, sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean on that third-party transfer thing. Okay, sorry, I'm talking about three questions at once. Hopefully that was clear. Probably dumb of me to try to juggle those around. And okay, Dana, you're just answering somebody else's question. Okay, that's a good segue. Again, I want to do this beginning section quickly. So I'm moving to DIR. Again, this is also review, but again, it's displaying the 27 different data elements. And then this is an overly busy slide right here. But just to try to get into it some is what this is basically doing for you is it's just attempting to explain how we're dealing with the math here in this report. So again, we're starting with that very wide net. The wide net here is obviously by looking at those in the services section. Again, that's the lowest bar. That's the way we're going to get the large pool of students. That's where we basically get everybody who has anything and everything to do with ABG, period. So that's the number we start with to make sure we don't miss anybody. Then that second row is basically those who are not in those 7 ABG programs. Those we're going to basically eliminate, because we're only looking at those who qualify for those 7 programs. Those are really the only ones that are official ABG students. So we're basically looking at that top row, subtracting that second row, and that gets us the bottom row, that is the students enrolled in the 7 ABG programs. Again, what's important about that bottom number, in this example, the 237, is that serves as the denominator for all 27 items on this DIR. When we're looking at the DIR, an important part of it, of course, is that percentage for each of the 27 items. The only way that report is worth anything is if we use a consistent denominator for all 27 items. So we're doing a lot of math up here at the top to make sure we get that denominator right and reconcile all your data to get down to that number that needs to be used as the denominator. You've got those 5 rows that I've kind of glossed over that are explained there in that middle box. The 5 rows are subsets of those students that we're excluding. That is, the students who are not in the 7 ABG programs. In some cases, in most cases, I'd say that's probably an on purpose. It's just somebody who's receiving a short-term service that you're not really worried about all that extra information for. If so, it's not really a problem at all, but it is going to be excluded before we account for that denominator. But these 5 rows here in the middle are just looking at potential, emphasize the word potential issues, that might be situations where you might want to double check and make sure, gee, you might have wanted to include those students if they got their high school diploma or they got a job or whatever, but they're not in an ABG program. We're just saying there's a good chance that that might have been the one where it was the mistake. Those are the ones that you might really want to consider enrolling them in a program and seeing what you can do to get the hours or get the demographics or whatever. Okay, moving right along here. Again, we've got that item description. We've got the 27 items. The DIR is giving you that item count and percentage for each item. And again, that percentage is going to equal that item count for the individual DIR item divided by that number of students enrolled in the 7 ABG programs that we basically get up there in the bottom row in that top section of the report. That's how we're computing that specific percentage for each of those 27 items on the DIR. So items 1 through 10, these are the ones that I'm calling the showstoppers. These are the ones that are basically, the ones that are kind of the required elements and so on. The next group we're basically identifying as items 11 through 22. These are all issues that are not specifically required for ABG reporting. For the most part, not in every case, but for the most part, we're looking at issues that are related to WIOA. You can see some examples, periods of participation, IELCE, barriers to employment, and so on. That is, different things that relate to areas of WIOA, things that are not required for ABG, but things that are definitely nice to have, because again, we are doing WIOA alignment. The more of this kind of information you're able to reconcile, the better. And then the final items 23 to 27, kind of the flip side, that is, we're getting into things more specific to ABG here. So again, we're basically identifying the number who earned outcomes for each of those categories, and then in the B's here, 23B, 24B, and so on, we're identifying learners who did not get the outcome ultimately on the ABG summary, but did mark the outcome somewhere in your TE database, but are not currently earning it because they didn't qualify. That is, they didn't have demographics or 12 hours or whatever. Those are the ones that you really want to consider troubleshooting. As an aside, there's a little example on this later on. Okay, so moving along here. Barriers to employment is another report we have available. Again, that's in review. Again, hopefully we'll have more workshops where we dig into this, but for now that still remains just an FYI. Okay, so it's 12:27, so I wanted to get here by 12:30, so we're on track. Hopefully that wasn't too fast, but I really wanted to whisk through all of that stuff we've gone through so far, because again, for 90-95% of you, everything we've done so far should be 100% review. Now we're getting into the drill down. So here we're getting into the meat of what we wanted to talk about now. So this slide I know is review. This is just a screenshot showing you how to deal with the information in Enterprise. So by click any cell, we just mean the standard left click button that you're using, to drill down. So in this example, we have the ABG Summary open. We're just doing the standard double click with that left click button on the mouse. We're drilling down on that 102 enrollees that are currently qualified for our ESL program. And this screenshot is just showing you how you double click that 102. Not so coincidentally, that generates a lister of exactly 102 students. You can left click and double click. That is to get that list to show which students we're talking about when we have a number represented in any one of these cells. Okay, a lot of you have heard this before as well, but we've said this for 5 or 6 years now. Drilling down is good. Right-clicking is even better. This is just illustrating the right-click menu. I won't say every single cell, but just about any cell on the ABG DIR, ABG Summary, and so on. If you right-click, you get 9, count them, 9 different options, 4 different listers, and 5 different reports on the right-click menu. The 4 listers are here. Again, we've got them listed. Student and student program year corresponds to the in-program years lister. That's going to be the one that always appears at the top of the right-click menu. As an aside, it's also the one that will always be the default option for what you get when you left-click and just do the regular double-click. That's the default, and that's the one that's at the top of the right-click menu, because in-program years is the selection you can make that guarantees that that lister you generate has an item count that exactly equals that number you see displayed in the cell. So again, same example, 102 ESL students. In-program years is the lister you can go down to make sure you get that lister of exactly 102. That is, the lister item count matches the report cell item count. Student population, that goes to the demographics lister. So you can right-click and go to student population if you're interested in fixing demographics issues, missing, gender, missing race and ethnicity, missing date of birth, et cetera, et cetera. Student program population, that goes to the program enrollments lister in TE. That's the, unduplicated list of student program enrollment. So that's when you're looking at items and you might have some of those students that are excluded because they're not enrolled in one of those 7 ABG programs. So you might consider it in some situations to go down to that program enrollments lister to look at who's enrolled in what program, potentially see who's missing, verify that everybody's enrolled in the correct program, and so on. Student record population corresponds to that student records lister. Student records is the lister in TE that includes just about all of those outcomes. It includes all of those items included in Update Record Field 9. That is the various outcomes related to employment and education and so on that you're marking to show all of these ABG outcomes. Okay, then our reports. You've got these 5 different reports. NRS Monitor, Outcomes Monitor, Services Monitor, Assessment Audit, and of course that ABG DIR. So starting with the NRS Monitor, again, it looks a little funky on your screenshot. That's because we deleted the student names here because this was from live data. But the NRS Monitor is the one that I call the everything you ever wanted to know and more about every student from a federal reporting point of view. So if you right-click and drill down to the NRS Monitor, it'll give you all the gory details for just those students that are included in that specific reporting cell from which you right-clicked. So again, it gives you the student name, ID, program, pre- and post-test information, information about their hours, information about their enrollment, information about periods of participation. Again, just about anything you'd ever want to know about that specific group of students. Okay, we have the Outcomes Monitor. The Outcomes Monitor allows more detail for that middle section of the ABG Summary and gives you more details about which outcomes. When you're looking at that ABG Summary and you're looking at the different areas, employment, transition, whatever, you're going to get that item count that aggregates all of those outcomes that are comprised within that category. So for example, when you look at the employment outcomes on the ABG Summary, it's not necessarily going to be the number of students who got a job. It's going to be the sum of the students who got a job, in addition those who retained the job, and in addition those who entered military. That is, it's going to be the sum of those three different fields in TE that all potentially contribute to those employment outcomes. If you wanted more of a breakdown of how many marked get a job versus how many marked entered military, for example, you need to drill down to the Outcomes Monitor. The Outcomes Monitor will provide you that greater level of detail. So this is just another screenshot with the Outcomes Monitor to provide a little bit better example than the screenshot we gave you before. Also, another thing on the Outcomes Monitor is we've got the legend here at the bottom. The Outcomes Monitor can be a little confusing. It's just giving you TE terminology here. So if that TE or WIOA-related terminology is confusing, go to the last page of the report, and that gives you that translation sheet, that is those names that TE is using for WIOA versus some of those ABG titles that in some cases are a little different. Okay, Services Monitor, that's the same issue with services as what I just described with outcomes. On those individual services categories, it'll just aggregate the total number of students with supportive, aggregate the number of training, transition, and so on. If you want a more detailed view of which specific services were received by each student, you want to right-click and drill down to Services Monitor. That Services Monitor will specify individual service by individual student. Okay, moving right along here, you've heard me talk about this assessments audit is arguably the most confusing report we have in all of TE reporting. It's basically the everything you wanted to know related to pre- and post-testing as it applies to federal reporting. This is one that we basically extracted directly from the NRS reports. So it does look at some of those issues such as periods of participation. So that's the short explanation on why this is so detailed and why so many people find it a little confusing. But in any case, if you're looking to reconcile pre- and post-testing, you can find anything you'd ever want to know about each student, what they did related to pre- and post-testing by right-clicking and accessing this report. And then finally, you've got the DIR. We just explained that a good bit. But the issue with that is if you run the data integrity report directly from the TE menu, obviously you're going to get the DIR for all of the students included in ABG reporting. The beauty of drilling down to the DIR is that will isolate just the students in that cell. So a lot of you have said, well, the DIR can be a little bit unwieldy sometimes because you're dealing with so many students. You get these long laundry lists of way too many students. So if you're doing troubleshooting, you might want to consider right-clicking and drilling down for the DIR. So in this case, we're looking at just those 48 learners in this screenshot who are enrolled in ABE. So instead of getting all 300 students in our ABG program, we're limiting it to just the 48 in ABE. So we have a smaller list. We can identify students more easily and thereby, use less time to troubleshoot and fix any issues. Well, what I'm saying is it does not include pre-testing. So if you've marked that, Dana, it's not that big of a deal. But in that detailed service definitions, I think that's where I got it from. Send me an email and I'll send you the detailed document. But in general, we would say the time a student is spending doing the official CASAS pre or post test, that's not really a service. That's just them participating in what's required for part of their regular enrollment. When we're talking about assessment, we're really talking about other potential types of assessment. Maybe maybe it's a needs assessment on what classes they want to enroll in. Maybe it's a what color is your parachute for job preferences. It could be a million different things. But we're looking at the other types of assessment you might be doing, not necessarily required pre and post testing. Again, minor distinction. It's not worth spending hours on end fixing it if you've already marked it, but in general, that is our recommendation. Okay, moving along here. So now we're finally getting to where, okay, thank you, Dana. I haven't seen that many questions, so I'm gonna, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. The number of questions has been pretty mild to date, so I'm just going to assume that's in the, hey, everything's so crystal clear, how can anybody have any stinking questions category, and everything's all review, you all got it. So now we're moving into the meat of the presentation, and I'll just reiterate, the timing is just about right as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so what I wanted to get into, and here we're kind of finally getting into new stuff, where I wanted to get more into specific examples. So that is what was advertised here. That's where we're trying to get into new stuff and not just do the same old that we've been doing over and over again. So we're looking at agency-level data valuation, and we're also looking at consortium-level data valuation. We're basically providing 3 examples of each. Obviously, there's many, many ways to do either one of these, but for the sake of argument, when you're doing data at the agency level, we're suggesting you might want to consider using those drill-down features in TE we just got through describing. At the consortium level, as we've discussed, the consortium level reporting definitely goes out of its way to not allow you the ability to drill down to the student level. That's 100% on purpose because, again, given FERPA, all those privacy and confidentiality issues, we do not want you to be able to have somebody from Agency X be able to drill down and get student level information from Agency Y. You must be employed by that specific agency to have any business drilling down and finding out that detailed information about specific students. So at the consortium level, we're obviously saying drill down won't work, but we're going to say there's some things you can do in Excel that might be useful. So we're going to go and provide some examples of that also. So we're going to start, here's, again, we're starting with 3 agency level examples. So here's our first agency dilemma. We're starting really basic here. The first, again, we're going back a slide here. We'll look at a basic DIR drill down. Then we'll look at one related to pre and post testing. And then we'll go ahead and look at a self-reported outcomes illustration. Those will be the 3 we're doing at the agency level. So starting with a simple DIR drill down, the example we're going to use is we're just going to say, hey, we've got a unexpected, unusually high number of students missing labor force status. You can see from the screenshot, we have almost half of our students missing labor force status. So number 1, the number of students missing it is high, and it's especially high when you compare that 6E with item 6. The number missing labor force status is almost as large as the number who have it. So, hey, we've got a problem here. We need to follow up. So the solution is go ahead and right-click on that number of students missing labor force status. So that is right-click on that number 101, and you can right-click, and again, you'll get that option, with that menu with the 9 options. In this case, drill down to records, student records. Again, that's going to be the lister that includes labor force status. So you can right-click, get that menu of, the record, student records, open up, the different students missing it, and then you can simply indicate whether they're employed or unemployed. Again, really simple situation here, but that would be the example of how to fix that. Okay, dilemma number 2 at the agency level. This one we're looking at a pre- and post-testing example. So this dilemma is we're looking at the left-hand section. We're monitoring our EFL gains. And in this case, we're saying, gee, the number of students in the main bread and butter programs for pre- and post-testing, you can see we're highlighting ESL and we're highlighting ABE. You can see the number of students who have achieved EFL gains is low. And especially when you compare the number who have achieved gains with the number of qualified enrollees, you can look at column D and compare it to column B. That's the way you know whether that number is high or low. So we'll moving along and getting into the solution. So here's the solution. Again, it's kind of a busy slide. Lots of material that can get deeper on this if you want it. But the solution here is, for starters, what you want to do is go ahead and compare columns B and C. So you might remember about a half hour ago, I noted that column C is a relatively new column in the report. In our mind of minds, we think it's pretty important. We think column C can be exceedingly useful when you're doing that troubleshooting relating to pre- and post-testing. So step number 1 is compare column B to column C. So number 2, you can see if the numbers are far apart. So in this example, we're saying the totals in column B are far apart from column C. You can see the number of learners with a pre-post pair in both ESL and ABE are less than half the number of qualified enrollees. Hopefully everybody can see that. I can't see your faces. We're kind of too big for me to be stubborn about it, so I won't be stubborn about it. But hopefully you can all see from the screenshot how the number in column B is quite a bit larger than those totals in column C. Again, what that's showing us is, of all of our qualified enrollees in both ESL and ABE, less than half of those students currently have a valid pre-post-test pair. So once we know that that's a big issue at our agency, then we know that our simple solution here is we need to get more students pre- and post-tested. Maybe it's just scheduling more e-test sessions. Maybe it's looking at those students who are absent when you did the testing. Maybe it's banging on teachers to do better communication with the students. Maybe it's appealing directly to the student. Obviously, there's a million things that you might do to get students in for more pre- and post-testing, or encouraging teachers or encouraging programs to do more of it. But bottom line is, if column B and column C are far apart, you know right away that solution is going to be you need to get more students tested. Until you do that, you're guaranteed to have low results there in column D. On the other hand, if columns B and C are similar, so the opposite of what we're showing in the screenshot. As an aside, and this is going deep in the weeds here, if this is too much, just discard it. But I know some of you like this kind of stuff. My personal rule of thumb, this is nothing official, just my own opinion, is the way you determine whether B and C are similar, like I'm saying in number 3, or far apart, like I'm saying in number 2, is I'm going to say equal to or greater than 70%. Statewide in WIOA 2, our persistence rate has been around 70% for the last 4 or 5 years. So in my opinion, 70% is a nice round figure that you can all use as the line in the sand, distinguishing whether you can safely say the numbers are similar or the numbers are far apart. Just my 2 cents there. So if those numbers are similar in columns B and C, but then you're looking over in column D and the number who get gains is still a low number, then we're saying, well, hey, getting more students tested probably is not going to help you that much because the numbers already show you've done a good job getting everybody tested. But if you still have low numbers on the number making gains, then the issue is with the students' performance on the actual tests. So then you need to review test scores, review learning gains, and do whatever it is you need to do to evaluate performance in the classroom using the TE test results reports, looking at things like, lesson planning and curriculum modules and so on, digging into what's going on in the classroom to improve learning gains when that is the case. So there's a million things, obviously, you can do to follow up on solution number 2. There's a million things you can do to follow up on solution number 3. That's an hour we don't have right now, but we're just looking at using the data to draw that general completion. Helena, yes, if you get, HSD completion, not necessarily. If you're marking high school diploma, not necessarily, but that high school credits outcome actually will get included in column D. So yes, there might be some in there, but again, if they're making the high school diploma or getting the high school credits outcome, that would be a good example of one where you probably don't want to do any more pre and post testing. Okay, so moving along here, and sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. I feel like I missed something here. Sorry, let me look at my new. Okay, no. Okay, so again, the other solution here is you can look at that NRS Monitor. So sorry, this is just follow up from that previous slide. So more specific with your TE drill down, whether you're looking at getting more students tested or looking at improving your students' test scores, either way, the drill down solution is you can right click and generate the NRS Monitor. If you're doing it when B and C are far apart, like in the example in the screenshot, then you can right click, generate that NRS Monitor, and use that NRS Monitor to identify those students who have qualified enrollment. That is, they're in the authorized program, they have 12 hours, they have demographics and so on, but they do not have a pre-post test pair. That's who you're going to be looking for first. Those are going to be the ones you really want to get pre and post tested. If, on the other hand, you've got most of your students tested and the problem is with student test performance not getting tested in the first place, once again, we're still going to recommend the NRS Monitor, but in this case, you can use the NRS Monitor to look at specific test scores and highlight those students that made 0 or minimal gains. When you generate that NRS Monitor, again, I'm advertising it as the everything you'd want to know and more. It specifies their pre-test date, their pre-test score, their post-test date, their post-test score, and basically lists for each individual student what those pre- and post-test scores mean in terms of achieving level completion. So you look at that NRS Monitor, and it gives you all of that information you need to know to identify those students that made the gains versus those students who did not. So either way, generate the NRS Monitor. Okay, our third and final agency level issue is, in this case, we're going to just go straight for one of those self-reported outcomes examples. So in this case, we're looking at, a couple of those ABG Outcomes categories and comparing it to number of enrollees. And in this case, the number who achieved the outcomes is lower than what we expected, especially when compared to the number of qualified enrollees. So in this case, we're looking at the number of CTE students that entered employment and increased wages. The good news is those are by program, those are our highest totals, but when you compare it to the number of qualified enrollees, those numbers look much worse. And again, obviously, this is generally going to be the goal of CTE for most of you. So those numbers look good when compared to all the other programs. But when looking at the qualified number of enrollees, obviously these numbers are not very good. So we want to just figure out how might we improve these numbers. So in our data, the solution here is we're going to right-click each of these numbers. So we're going to right-click the qualified enrollees in column E. And then in this example, we're specifically looking at employment and wages. So we're also going to right-click those cells in columns I and J. And we're going to generate that ABG DIR for those three separate groups of students. And then we can compare those three reports to identify students that might be missing demographics and students that might have less than 12 hours of instruction. So what we're basically saying here is we're going down to the DIR. That's going to be the first step, is just simple comparison. The way we can do that in better detail is, in particular, we can look at those DIR items toward the bottom. That is the ABG specific items. So in this example, we're looking at employment and we're looking at wages. That's item 25A and B, as well as 26A and B. Those are the items that refer to employment and wages. So if we've got the higher totals if we've got higher totals listed for 25B or 26B, that is individuals that mark the outcome but did not qualify for ABG. Those are going to be the individuals where we need to perform some data cleanup. That is, we need to get more than 12 hours, we need to add missing demographics, and so on. If we've got lower totals in B, in those 25 and 26B, that, in relation to how many we have in 25A and 26A, then that suggests that maybe the issue is not cleaning up, but it just means we haven't put enough positive outcomes. We basically input hours and demographics for those who need it, but there just might be a general issue where we didn't mark those outcomes as much as we should have. Again, this is not going to be 100% foolproof, but just some friendly suggestions of how you might follow up and beef up these outcomes. Those items 23 to 27, again, we've got the A and B basically set up the same for each of those 6 ABG outcomes categories, so you can look and see ones that require data cleanup versus ones where that's not really the issue. Okay, so those are our 3 examples for agency level evaluation. Now we're going to get into some examples for consortium level data evaluation. So we've looked at this already. When you log in and you have consortium level login access, that opens up a section of the TE menu. If you don't have consortium access, you will not really be able to access the section of the TE menu, but this is the section that magically opens up once you get that consortium manager level access. And again, it's giving you comparative reports for demographics, for the ABG tables, and for barriers to employment. So the demographics is the one that we've been advertising as the niftiest of the 3, because that's where you can see each agency lined up side by side. That's where you probably need the least amount of help with tools such as Excel, because TE already does that for you. And as we've explained before, it's really just a space issue where when we look at ABG outcomes or we look at barriers to employment, it's already way, way, way too busy to put agencies side by side on one piece of paper for one report. So just to reiterate, though, demographics is not that way. So we've got the item count and percentage. Back to what I was saying, if you're looking at the ABG summary or barriers to employment, you do not get that nifty layout like you do for demographics. You just get a separate page for each agency in your consortium. So in this example, we've got a larger consortium with 15 agencies. So when we generate the report, we get 15 different pages, 1 page for each agency. So moving along, barriers to employment, that again gives you a separate page for each agency. So moving on, like we were saying, our consortium level troubleshooting, what we're suggesting you could potentially do is create Excel spreadsheets. Again, for demographics, we really kind of feel like your side-by-side analysis should be pretty good by what you have at TE. But like we said, perhaps for barriers to employment or ABG summary, getting that aligned side-by-side might be a little bit more problematic. So some of you know this, some of you don't, but just to reiterate, when you're in these consortium level reports, just like for any other TE report, you can convert it to an Excel spreadsheet. So here's the screenshot that gives you those simple directions. Once you have that TE report open, you can click that export button from the report. And then once you do that, that will just go into your Windows operating system. And once you get into that Windows, you can go ahead and go into Save As. And I don't know how legible it is from the screenshot, but when you click the drop box for Save As, that's showing for not just these reports, but for all of these TE reports. That's basically showing you how you can save all TE reports in all these different file formats, PDF, Word, PowerPoint, and of course Excel. So we're just saying we're selecting Excel at the bottom, and then we're just showing proof in the pudding here over there to the right to show how that gives you, that creates that Excel document by using that Excel button or that export button from the TE report. So here you can see we get a very busy spreadsheet as a result. Basically it exports all of those data elements from the TE report and puts it into a nifty Excel spreadsheet. So kind of good news, bad news here. Obviously, good news is, of course, lots and 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 lots of data, lots of stuff to play with. Once again, everything you'd ever want to know and more. Bad news, though, is kind of the same thing. Everything you wanted to know and more, perhaps more than you bargained for, way too much to really keep track of in spreadsheet format. So the suggestions we provide here is it's all pretty self-explanatory once it's on the spreadsheet. So the suggestions are just different things you might do to, make this more manageable and make this more user-friendly so you can really start troubleshooting. So the first thing, kind of a simple, easy formatting thing is we took this really unwieldy spreadsheet, and you can see it gives you consortium ID and member ID. Hopefully it's legible from your screen, but you can see here it gives you that breakdown by consortium and agency ID. I'll also point out that when you do the spreadsheet locally, you will get the agency name and you will get the consortium name. In my example, those are left blank on purpose because we're looking at live data. Names are changed to protect the innocent here, but again, we've just color-coded it so you can easily break down all of the information agency by agency so you can easily view it in that fashion on the spreadsheet. So with that, you can also use those Excel filtering. You can go to that data menu, and that will allow you to filter each individual column. So in this case, we're just saying, hey, we're filtering by agency. So what we did is we basically clicked that little drop box above the agency column in this example. You can see the little arrow here that gets created at the top. So we're clicking that, and we're getting a little drop box menu here. We uncheck select all, so that unchecks all boxes. In this case, we just checked one of these member IDs, and that magically filtered it. So now we're just looking at that one individual agency rather than looking at the entire consortium, just to allow us to specify and get a little bit more specific information and not just getting a massive overkill of data like we do in that original spreadsheet. Yet another somewhat more creative example is, in this case, we're going to filter by program. So this presumes we once again restored and we have the entire consortium listed. We use that same option for the data menu in Excel to start filtering. And now we're basically clicking that filter drop box there for program area in this example. So we clicked it, and once again, we uncheck select all. That gives us the ability to select any one of these ABG programs. So in this example, we selected ABG or ABE and clicked OK. Now this gives us, a nice, easy to read view of ABE results for each of the 8 agencies in this specific consortium, so we don't have to deal with all that excess clutter. It just gives us ABE results for the 8 agencies in this consortium, appearing side by side, row by row, providing it all in this nifty, easy-to-read view. Okay, then one more example here is we can also hide cells. So we can reformat the cells to isolate key data points. So in this case, we're going to the Excel format menu where you can hide and unhide rows. You can hide and unhide columns. So in this example, we're going ahead and we're hiding a bunch of columns. What we did here is we hid a bunch of columns that appeared to the right of program area, but to the left of the employment results. Going back here a little bit, so going back here a little bit, again, this spreadsheet that we create includes many, many columns. It can be a little bit unwieldy, so hiding all of this extra clutter here for these other columns, so we can hide all those columns in between, and in this case, we're doing so we can really isolate these specific outcome categories. So in this example, we're hiding columns so we can basically line up our employment and wages results and put it right there side by side, these different specific ABG program areas. And again, just making it more user-friendly so we can look at each instructional program within each agency of the consortium and basically compare and contrast number who entered employment as well as number who increased wages, and kind of do it in a much user-friendly, efficient manner to compare those results across the consortium. Okay, moving on here. And then here we're just basically doing kind of a cross-tab example, you might say, where in this case we're doing we're basically filtering and hiding simultaneously. We're filtering by program area. We're hiding columns because we want to get 2 specific outcomes lined up next to that program area. So we filtered by program area and we hid several columns at the same time. In this example, we're hiding all the columns from column I through column O, as you can see in this example. So now we're able to look at just ABE, and we're able to hone in on employment and wages outcomes, and this will give us our item counts for employment and wages lined up across the areas of ABE. Obviously, the one negative here that I'm seeing now is it may or it may not be easy to discern these color codings here for each individual agency. If that was the case, you could certainly do more hiding and unhiding and just make sure that you had that member name or member ID included as another row in this, so you can remember which color coding equates to each agency in your consortium. Okay, and then we're just showing, we're not going to do it all over again, but all of those specific examples relate to the ABG summary. If you're more into ABG barriers to employment, or for that matter, you like those ABG reporting tables better than the ABG summary, fine. You can pretty much apply all of those examples I just explained to those other consortium level reports to achieve very similar results. We're just basically showing those specific examples for one report, a little bit of educated guesswork and thinking the ABG summary is going to be the one that you're most likely to do any of that additional troubleshooting. Okay, and then this is showing how you can do it for the demographic summary as well. I'll just say probably better off just using what TE already gives you there. Again, this information is limited enough that it gives you the side-by-side, but if you want to use graphing, if you want to do some crazier spreadsheet stuff, you can certainly do the same things in the demographic summary as well. Okay, so I've run a few minutes over, but that's all I have. Sorry, I ran a few minutes over. The questions did kind of fall off the map here the last few minutes. I don't know if that's because you disappeared or whether I lost everybody. Hopefully it's that everybody was hanging in there, but obviously we'll probably have more regional and webinars here in the future to try to detail this more. With a lot of this stuff, there's way more information with a lot of these evaluation things. So in your evaluation or in your emails to me, please let me know, because obviously there's hours and hours and hours of this that we could do more if you really want it. Hard to say what of this needs more detailing versus which of this might constitute TMI. So please let me know what of this we need to flesh out more versus what of this is already getting to be too much information. And with that, I will sign off, or I won't really sign off. Let me turn it over to Veronica. Hopefully you're still here, Veronica. If you have it, Veronica, do you have any parting shots?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Dave, for all of this wonderful information, and thank you for everyone for participating in today's webinar. Tomorrow will be part 3 of this mini-series. It will be Lyric, and they will be presenting on how they use data to empower learners. I've included the link to register for tomorrow's webinar as well as any other upcoming webinars we have for AEBG tab. I am going to be closing the room now, and once I close it, an evaluation will appear on your screen. Please be sure to fill out this evaluation to let Jay know what you thought about today's webinar, and as he indicated, please be sure to address any questions or further technical assistance you need in the area of data and accountability. Thank you all, and hope to see you all tomorrow for Lyric's presentation. Have a great day.